Every empire is born in a whisper and dies in a roar. But Egypt was different. Egypt did not whisper. Egypt did not roar. Egypt simply endured. For 3,000 years it stood at the edge of a great desert, fed by a single thread of water moving through the sand, and it refused to disappear. No other civilization in human history held on that long. Not Rome, not China, not Babylon. Egypt held on, and it did so by building something deeper than walls and weapons. It built an idea. And that idea was so powerful, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, that even when foreign armies marched through its gates, the empire did not break. It absorbed, it adapted, it continued. To understand how, you need to go back to the beginning. Not just to the pyramids, not just to the gold and the tombs and the famous faces carved in stone, but to the very soil that made it all possible. Imagine you are standing in the northeastern corner of Africa, roughly 5,000 years ago. The year is around 3100 BCE. The world you know, your world of instant communication and climate-controlled comfort, does not exist. What exists is heat. Real heat, the kind that makes the air shimmer at midday and turns the ground into something closer to an oven than a floor. The Sahara Desert stretches behind you in every direction except one. And that one direction, north toward the sea, is where the Nile flows. And the Nile, in this moment, is everything. You can smell it before you see it. Wet earth, rotting reeds, the low, green smell of life pushing through mud. After months of baking under the African sun, the river has flooded, and it has left behind a thin, dark strip of soil, so fertile it looks almost black. That soil has a name. The ancient Egyptians called it Kemet, the Black Land, and they called the desert beyond it Deshret, the Red Land. The border between life and death in this world is not measured in miles or years, it is measured in meters. Step off the black soil and you are in the desert. Step back onto it and you are alive again.
This geography was not just a backdrop to Egyptian civilization, it was the engine of it. The Nile flooded every year like clockwork between June and September. It deposited nutrients into the soil. Farmers planted in October. They harvested in March, and then they waited for the next flood. This cycle, flood, plant, harvest, wait, was so reliable, so beautifully mechanical, that it shaped how Egyptians understood time, death, and rebirth. They did not fear the cycle, they worshipped it. They built a religion around it, and from that religion, they built a state. By around 3100 BCE, something extraordinary happened along the Nile. The various chiefdoms and early kingdoms that had been competing across the region began to consolidate. A king, possibly the legendary Narmer, though historians still debate this, united Upper and Lower Egypt into a single political entity. Upper Egypt was the narrow southern strip of the Nile Valley, stretching toward modern Sudan. Lower Egypt was the wide, fertile delta where the Nile spread out into the Mediterranean. These two regions had different cultures, different symbols, different ways of life. Uniting them was no small thing. It required politics, military force, and something more subtle, a shared mythology. And so the Pharaoh was born, not just as a king, not just as a ruler, but as a living god, the human incarnation of Horus, the falcon deity, son of Osiris, lord of the sky. This was not a metaphor the ancient Egyptians used loosely. They meant it literally. The pharaoh did not simply govern, he maintained cosmic order. He held the universe together. And when he died, he became Osiris, god of the underworld, and his son, the next pharaoh, became Horus once more. The cycle continued, just like the Nile.
Picture the ordinary life unfolding along those black-soiled banks in the days of the early Old Kingdom, around 2600 BCE. Memphis is the capital now, a city of somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people, which in this era makes it one of the largest urban centers on Earth. You are a farmer. Your name might be something like Amenhotep, beloved of Amun, and you live in a mud-brick house on the outskirts of the city, close enough to the river that you can hear it at night. Your day begins before sunrise, not because of an alarm, not because of a schedule, because the sun is your calendar, your clock, and your employer. You rise when Ra rises. You sleep when he descends into the underworld. The air at this hour is cool, almost startlingly so after the previous day, and the smell coming off the Nile is rich and slightly sour, the smell of mud and growing things, and the distant scent of papyrus burning somewhere on the far bank. You eat bread. You almost always eat bread. Egyptian bread is dense and slightly gritty because the grinding stones leave fine particles of sand in the flour, and over years of eating it, those particles slowly wear down your teeth. Dental disease is one of the quiet killers of this civilization. Pharaohs and farmers alike suffer from it. You wash it down with a thick, mildly fermented beer. Not the beer of modern imagination, not cold and golden in a glass, but something closer to liquid bread, drunk through a straw to filter out the chunks of grain.
You work. You work until midday when the heat becomes genuinely dangerous, then you rest in whatever shade exists. You work again in the late afternoon. The bureaucracy of the state touches your life in ways you do not always notice. Every year, officials arrive to measure the Nile flood levels using stone nilometers, precise calibrated devices built into the riverbank. They use these measurements to predict crop yields. They use those predictions to calculate your tax burden. You pay in grain. The state stores that grain in enormous granaries. That grain feeds the scribes, the soldiers, the priests, and most importantly, the workers who are building, somewhere to the north, something that will outlast every human language ever spoken, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let that phrase settle for a moment, because it is too familiar to us now, too flattened by centuries of repetition. In 2560 BCE, when it is nearing completion, it is not a tourist destination, it is a statement. A 146-meter-tall, 2.3 million stone block statement that the pharaoh Khufu is not merely a man. It is the most massive structure built by human hands anywhere on Earth, and it will hold that title for nearly 4,000 years. The logistics alone are staggering. Around 20,000 workers, not slaves, as popular mythology long claimed, but paid laborers, specialists, craftsmen, organized into named work gangs with their own cultures, their own rivalries, their own medical care, move through a construction site that functions like a small city. We know this because archaeologists found their village. They found their tools, their graffiti, their bread molds, their broken bones healed by skilled surgeons. These were not anonymous sufferers, they were professionals.
The pyramid is not just a tomb, it is a machine for transformation. Buried within it, surrounded by thousands of carved spells, the pyramid texts, the oldest religious literature in the world, the body of the king undergoes a cosmic journey. The burial chamber is oriented with mathematical precision toward specific stars, particularly the constellation Orion, associated with Osiris. The shafts cut through the stone are not ventilation ducts, they are soul corridors. They point to the sky. The Egyptians are not just burying their dead, they are launching them. This is the world of the Old Kingdom, a period stretching from roughly 2686 to 2181 BCE, characterized by an almost serene confidence. The state is functioning, the floods are reliable,
The theology is settled. And then something shifts. Around 2200 BCE, the climate changes. Drought grips the region. The Nile floods become erratic, sometimes barely rising at all. Harvests fail. The grain stores empty. The central government, which has derived its divine legitimacy in large part from its ability to ensure agricultural abundance, begins to fracture. Regional governors, nomarchs, stop sending grain to the capital and start hoarding it for their own people. The Old Kingdom collapses into what historians call the First Intermediate Period, roughly a century of fragmentation, famine, and political chaos. This is the moment where the shadow narrative of Egypt becomes visible. Because while the great temples and official records speak of divine order and cosmic harmony, the literature of this period tells a different story. A text known as the Admonitions of Ippur describes a world turned upside down, a land where the poor have become wealthy and the wealthy have been stripped bare, where the dead are buried in the river because there is no time for proper ritual, where the confidence of the Old Kingdom has curdled into something like collective trauma. This is not an empire failing. This is a people processing catastrophe through writing.
And yet, Egypt comes back. Around 2055 BCE, a king named Mentuhotep II reunites the country from his base in Thebes, a city far to the south that will now begin its long ascent toward becoming the most sacred city in the ancient world. The Middle Kingdom begins, and it is different from the Old Kingdom in subtle but profound ways. The pharaoh is still divine, still cosmic, but now there is a new emphasis on the king as a shepherd, as someone responsible for the welfare of his people. The ideology of kingship has been chastened by the memory of collapse. The Middle Kingdom produces some of the finest literature in Egyptian history, complex, emotionally layered texts like the story of Sinuhe, which reads almost like a modern novel, full of exile, longing, and the ache of belonging. But the pattern holds: stability, prosperity, fragmentation. Around 1650 BCE, a people called the Hyksos, originally from the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, and Syria, migrate into the Delta region in large numbers and eventually seize political control of Lower Egypt. The Egyptians are horrified, not because of ethnic prejudice exactly, but because foreign rule disrupts the cosmic order. The pharaoh is supposed to be the living God who maintains Ma'at, a concept that translates roughly as truth, justice, and cosmic harmony. A foreign king cannot do this. The universe itself is at risk. The Hyksos, to be fair, are not conquerors in the brutal sense. They do not burn cities. They adopt Egyptian customs, use Egyptian titles, worship Egyptian gods, but they bring something with them that will change Egypt forever. The horse-drawn chariot, the composite bow, and new bronze-working techniques. Egypt has no cavalry tradition. Suddenly, it needs one.
Around 1550 BCE, a prince named Ahmose from the city of Thebes launches a campaign that drives the Hyksos out of Egypt completely. Ahmose becomes the founder of the 18th dynasty and the beginning of the New Kingdom, the most spectacular, most powerful, most internationally active period in all of Egyptian history. And this is where Egypt stops being a civilization that endures and becomes an empire that expands. The New Kingdom pharaohs are something new. They are warriors. They are imperialists. They take the military technology introduced by the Hyksos and use it to project Egyptian power deep into Nubia in the south and far into the Levant in the northeast. Under pharaohs like Thutmose I and his extraordinary daughter Hatshepsut, who ruled not as queen but as pharaoh, wearing the double crown and the ceremonial beard,
Egypt becomes the center of a vast trading and tributary network stretching from sub-Saharan Africa to the edge of Mesopotamia. Hatshepsut deserves more than a footnote. She ruled for roughly 20 years, from around 1473 to 1458 BCE, during which Egypt was largely at peace, trade flourished, and she commissioned some of the most beautiful monuments of the ancient world, including her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which still stands today with a grace that feels almost modern. After her death, her successor, Thutmose III, possibly her stepson, had her images systematically carved from monuments across Egypt. Her name was erased, her statues were smashed. For over 3,000 years, she was lost to history. She was rediscovered in the 19th century CE when archaeologists began deciphering the hieroglyphic records and noticed a pharaoh whose name had been deliberately removed. The erasure only made her more fascinating. Here is one of the most powerful rulers in Egyptian history, a woman who held the double crown in a civilization that was deeply gendered in its official ideology, and she was nearly written out of existence by the very civilization she had served so brilliantly. Now imagine Egypt at its absolute peak. The year is around 1350 BCE. Thebes, the southern capital, has a population perhaps exceeding 100,000 people. It is the wealthiest city on earth. The temple complex at Karnak, still the largest religious building ever constructed by human hands, is being continuously expanded. Gold pours in from Nubian mines to the south. Tribute arrives from Canaanite city-states to the northeast. Syrian princes send their sons to be educated at the Egyptian court, absorbing Egyptian culture, returning home as cultural ambassadors for the most powerful empire on the planet. The streets of Thebes are something beyond any modern experience of ancient life. The noise is extraordinary. Not the romantic silence we associate with ruins, but the productive discomfort of a living city. Oxen pulling grain carts through narrow streets, the rhythmic hammering of bronze workers, the chanting of priests processing through temple gates that are painted in vivid red, blue, and gold. Incense burning in the sanctuaries, kifi, a complex mixture of honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, and a dozen other substances, filling the air with something heavy and sweet and slightly intoxicating. And in the middle of all this magnificent sensory chaos, something quietly strange is happening in the palace. A young pharaoh named Amenhotep IV has begun questioning the official religion. He does not worship Amun, the king of the gods, whose priests have grown so wealthy and powerful that they rivaled the pharaoh himself. He worships the Aten, the disk of the sun, the raw physical energy of light itself. Within a few years, he changes his name to Akhenaten, relocates the capital to a new city he builds from scratch in the desert called Akhetaten, and does something that has no precedent in Egyptian history. He attempts to erase all other gods and establish what some historians argue is the world's first experiment in monotheism. This is not a gentle religious reform. This is a theological revolution imposed by force. Priests are displaced, temples are closed, the names of other gods are chiseled from monuments across the country. The administrative machinery of the state, which is deeply intertwined with the religious establishment, lurches and stutters. Meanwhile, Egypt's foreign policy deteriorates. Letters discovered at Amarna, the modern name for Akhenaten's new city, revealed desperate pleas from Egyptian allies in the Levant, begging for military support against encroaching enemies. Akhenaten appears to have largely ignored them. He dies around 1336 BCE. His revolution dies with him. Within a few years, his city is abandoned. His name is erased. His son, a young boy who briefly ruled as Tutanakhaten, changes his name to Tutankhamun, reinstates the old gods, and moves the capital back to Thebes. Tutankhamun dies young, around 19 years old, before he can do anything else of historical significance. He would have been entirely forgotten, another minor pharaoh swallowed by time, except for one thing. His tomb, buried in the Valley of the Kings, was missed by the ancient tomb robbers who stripped almost every other royal burial in Egypt. It sat untouched for over 3,000 years, until an archaeologist named Howard Carter, funded by a British aristocrat, cracked it open in November 1922.
The world had never seen anything like it. The golden death mask, the nested coffins, the thousands of objects packed so densely into the small chambers that Carter spent a full decade cataloging them. Tutankhamun became the most famous pharaoh in history, not because of what he did, but because of what he kept. His tomb was a message in a bottle, sent from the ancient world, and when we finally opened it, we wept at what was inside. After Akhenaten collapse, Egypt stabilizes once more under a general-turned-pharaoh named Horemheb, and then, spectacularly, under the 19th dynasty and its greatest figure, Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great, who ruled for an extraordinary 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE. He is one of the longest reigning monarchs in all of human history. He fought the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE, arguably the earliest battle in history for which we have detailed tactical records from both sides. The result was something like a stalemate, though Ramesses immediately declared it a magnificent victory and had the account carved onto temple walls from Thebes to Abu Simbel. He had around 100 children. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh. He lived so long that multiple generations of Egyptians grew up assuming he would simply never die. And when he finally did, there was something close to civilizational shock. Who was Egypt without Ramesses? It turned out to be a question the following centuries would struggle to answer. The late period of Egyptian history, stretching roughly from 664 to 332 BCE, is characterized by a series of foreign conquests that would have shattered most civilizations. The Assyrians invade and sack Thebes. The Persians take control twice, ruling Egypt as a province of their vast empire. And yet, and this is the extraordinary thing, Egypt persists. Egyptian culture, Egyptian religion, the Egyptian language, Egyptian art forms, Egyptian bureaucratic structures, they all continue, adapting and absorbing foreign elements the way the Nile absorbs the rain. When Alexander the Great marches into Egypt in 332 BCE, he is not welcomed as a conqueror. He is welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. He goes to the oracle at Siwa, a desert oasis oracle with a reputation for revealing divine truths, and emerges declaring himself the son of the god Amun. The Egyptians understand exactly what this means. He is doing what every successful foreign ruler in Egypt eventually does. He is becoming Egyptian. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy takes control of Egypt and founds a dynasty that will rule for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies are Macedonian Greeks. They speak Greek at court. They build a great library in their new capital, Alexandria, which becomes the intellectual center of the Mediterranean world. But they are also pharaohs. They build Egyptian temples in the traditional style. They worship Egyptian gods. They have their portraits carved in the old manner. The last of them, a woman of extraordinary intelligence and political instincts, speaks 9 languages and is the first of her dynasty to bother learning Egyptian. Her name is Cleopatra VII. She is not Egyptian by ancestry, but she is Egyptian by devotion. She aligns herself with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, attempting to use Roman power to preserve Egyptian independence. When Antony is defeated and she understands that the Roman Octavian intends to parade her through the streets of Rome as a trophy of conquest, she chooses death over humiliation.
In 30 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt dies, and Egypt becomes a Roman province. 3,000 years. That is what we are trying to hold in the mind at once. 3,000 years of continuity, of collapse and recovery, of divine kings and ordinary farmers, of golden masks and gritty bread, of the Nile flooding and receding and flooding again, of a people who built their entire philosophy around a single insight, that what dies is not gone, and what falls will rise. The ruins they left behind are not ruins in the way we usually understand that word. A ruin implies something broken, something lost. The temples of Luxor, the pyramids of Giza, the valley tombs, the Rosetta Stone, these are not broken, they are messages. Written in stone because stone lasts, written with images because images cross the barrier of language, written by people who understood, perhaps better than any civilization before or since, that the future would come, and the future would be curious, and the future deserved to know that they had been here. Walk through the Temple of Karnak today, and you are walking through 30 centuries of accumulated intention. Every pharaoh who added a pylon or a hall or a sacred lake was saying the same thing in slightly different words. We were real. We mattered. We understood something about the universe that you want to understand too. What did they understand? Perhaps this, that a society survives not because of its weapons or its walls, but because of its story. The story Egypt told itself about the Nile, about the sun, about death and rebirth, about the cosmic duty of the ruler to maintain harmony, was so compelling, so beautifully constructed, so deeply satisfying to the human need for meaning, that it held for 3,000 years. When foreigners came, they did not destroy the story, they joined it. The archaeologists who uncover Egypt today are using technologies that would have seemed magical to even the most advanced civilization of the ancient world: ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, DNA analysis, isotope tracing. They are finding new tombs, new settlements, new fragments of texts that were thought lost forever. Every decade, our understanding of this civilization deepens and shifts. We discover that it was more complex, more diverse, more internally conflicted than any simple narrative allows. And beneath the sand, there is still more waiting. There are entire cities not yet excavated. There are papyri crumbling in jars not yet opened. There are mummies in tombs not yet found. The story of Egypt is not finished. It is ongoing. We are still reading it. When you stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, if you ever have the chance, something strange happens to your sense of time. The monument is so large and so old that your brain cannot fully process it. It refuses to become background. It stays in the foreground, insisting on its own reality. And what you feel, underneath the heat and the noise and the tourist commotion, is something very close to what the ancient Egyptians felt when they used the word mat, order, proportion, the sense that the universe, despite all evidence to the contrary, is arranged according to some principle that can be understood. That feeling is the real legacy of Egypt, not the gold, not the architecture, not even the remarkable continuity of its culture. It is the insistence, carved in stone, painted in tombs, written on papyrus, embedded in every aspect of daily life, that human beings can understand the world they live in, can impose meaning on chaos, can build something that lasts. 3,000 years, one river, one relentless, beautiful, enduring idea. Now, somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, there is a city that archaeologists believe has never been fully excavated, a city that may contain the answers to questions we have not thought to ask. What do you think lies buried there? And which lost civilization do you want to explore next?